Well, welcome everybody. This is the 1st of November. We're well into fall, and New England is feeling the cold weather rushing in. So I think it really confirms it is fall. But I want to welcome everybody. All the usual faces here. Glad to see you all, and we also have a couple of guests here to Tom's presentation. But before we start, just any first any. I don't have any particular announcement other than one, just as a heads up. The website is being worked on as we speak, just to get it prepped for Castleton in March. And seem to have a bit of a glitch with PayPal right now. And hopefully I'll get that resolved soon with Joe. But bear with us. I'll probably have to shoot an email to the reflector just so people know that we seem to have reached a little bit of a crinkle in the works, but hopefully we'll get that solved soon. But otherwise, we're just basking in the glow of fall Brookline, and people are hopefully playing around with the toys that they had purchased there. Let's see here. Does anyone have any announcements or things we should be aware of in terms of upcoming events or shows or things like that? So I can see Rich Lee waving his hand. So Rich.
Sorry, John, for the commercial, but New Jersey Antique Radio Club will be holding their annual Hamfest Swap Meet show at the Parsippany PAL on November 18th. That's our fall show. And all are welcome. And if you'd like to be a vendor, just get a hold of me through our website, and you can be a vendor too. Come on down.
Great. Thanks, Rich. That's always gives something for someone to look forward to if you can't wait until March for Castleton in Windham, New Hampshire.
Yeah, we're basically the last of the Hamfests in our area too. Yeah.
Good to know. Yeah, at this time of year we start running out of events because we get awfully close to the holidays. I think MIT is done. Tom, right? The MIT Ham events are done for the year, I think, right? So we are pretty much running out. So you may be one of the last events of the year in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So, here's your opportunity, folks. Go run down to New Jersey and visit the NJARC. And if you're so inclined, you can even be a member of both. But
please do.
Does anyone? Oh, of course, Bob. I'll certainly hand off to you. Yeah, Bob. Why don't you actually? Why don't we hand off to you, President Bob Harris?
Yeah, I'd like to just say. I think you can hear me. Yeah, just like to say thank you to John Gibbons. John does a great job running these meetings. I know he puts a lot of time into it, and they're held regularly. And I can see that we've got great attendance tonight, and also recognize the presenters. I know over the past several months we've had lots of presenters, but a big thanks to John for coordinating and holding the meetings. Thank you, John.
Oh, Bob, that's very kind of you. Thank you. Actually, you know what? A lot of the credit goes to all you guys because we have a great audience. The expertise is remarkable, spanning every facet, and it's fun for me. It's enjoyable. The work is really minimal when I get this kind of participation and enthusiasm. I really appreciate that, everybody. And we're going to keep going by every 2 weeks, or I should say 2 meetings a month, for as long as we can, as long as there's something to talk about. And I can certainly bore you with enough photos to bore you to tears, so no problem there. And fortunately, we have other clubs that we can borrow photos from. So there's always something, dig up something, I'm sure, to keep us moving along. And a big thank you, really, to be honest, with Tom, because Tom has been gracious in giving us some very quality presentations that are really fun, informative, and also necessarily mainstream. So we always appreciate that. Bob, was there anything else you wanted to share with the club before we perhaps kick off to Tom, or make sure nobody else has any other announcements before we get to the main part of our show? I guess not. Well, okay. So like I said before I started recording, so I'm going to put everyone on mute just for the Tom's presentation, and then when Tom is done, stops its recording, we'll feel free to unmute yourself, and we can certainly chat about Tom's presentation. I'm sure there'll be lots of fun discussions afterwards. But well, without further ado, I'd like to present Dr. Tom Perera, who's been a valuable member of our club for many years, an expert in many areas, and he's going to give us a fun presentation on Quack Medical Devices. And Tom, I guess I want to thank you, and I'm going to hand off to you. And meanwhile, I will just mute everybody at this moment.
Okay.
What? Hold on, Tom. One moment, Tom.
Thank you. I don't know how it got muted.
Unfortunately, it seems to insist on muting everybody, even if you're a co-host. I apologize for that, but I was hoping Zoom was smarter than that.
Great. Okay. I just have a little bit of work to do to try and record it on this computer. And I believe that's happening now. Okay. Let me start out just by introducing myself. My name is Tom Perera, and I'm a Columbia University and Montclair State University professor emeritus of neuroscience. I'd like to parse that for you. Emeritus is a fancy word that academics like to use, but it just means retired. Professor means that I profess or pretend to know something. And neuroscience, of course, is the science of the nervous system. I've also been a ham radio operator for over 70 years. And what that means is that I've tinkered with lots of electronics and gotten lots and lots of electric shocks. When you put all those together, you find that it explains my fascination with the incredible electrical world inside the body. And it also has allowed me to design and use complex electronics in my research that most people in the field were not trained to use. So that'll sort of inform what we're going to do today. And I'm going to start out by setting the mood, if you will, for the time when Quack Medical Devices were popular. People were just barely beginning to realize that electricity was something that they were going to have to deal with eventually. And it was necessary to put signs like this up on the wall next to the electric light switch. This room is equipped with Edison electric light. Do not attempt to light with a match. Simply turn the key on the wall by the door. And then they also would say the use of electricity for lighting is in no way harmful to health, nor does it affect the soundness of sleep. So that's the kind of world we're talking about. And in came, before that and after that, just immense numbers of quack medical people trying to make money off of the gullible public. The book on the left, Quack Tales of Medical Fraud from the Museum of Questionable Medical Devices, and the book on the right, A Brief History of the Worst Ways to Cure Everything. So that's the world we're going to look into. And here's an example of a real quack. He's holding a jar of salve, and he's yelling at the top of his voice. And that's how the word quack got to be. It's a Dutch word for quacksalver. A quacksalver is a hawker of salve that yells. So selling your wares in a loud voice was the beginning of the word, and then it gradually sort of trickled down to a lot of other things. But let's look at some of the things that were being sold in those days. Dr. M.A. Simmons' liver medicine is shown on the left. And for some reason, he's selling it with a picture of Custer's last fight as somehow related to his liver medicine. And down at the bottom, it says 5,000 bottles and boxes are sold daily. You got to convince the public that you're dealing with a really popular thing. And on the right, we see the Dr. M.A. Simmons liver medicine. which can cure indigestion, biliousness, colic, costiveness, dyspepsia, and sick headache. And it prevents fever, ague. And down at the bottom, we see an ad for Chillerine, cure for chills, iron cordial, king of tonics, and a pile cure all in one. What a bargain. The really neat stuff is when we get into asthma cigarettes. Dr. Batty, a great name, I think, Dr. Batty's asthma cigarettes for your health since 1882 for the temporary relief paroxysms of asthma. Effectively treats asthma, hay fever, bowel breath, all diseases of the throat, head colds, bronchial irritation, not recommended for children under 6. And on the right, we see Asthmador cigarettes or Asthmador pipe mixture to be smoked in a pipe. And down there below that, it says they contain no tobacco, nor habit-forming drugs, nor ingredients. So this is the kind of stuff that was being presented to the public back in the 1880s. And of course, along with it was testimonials. I was nervous, sick, sleepless, and my favorite prescription restored my health. And on the right, was confined to bed for 4 weeks, now does homework easily. Great stuff. One of the tip-offs that these things are not what they are cut out to be is when you see a very specific number, like the one I have circled here, 3,188,000 copies of this book have been sold. A lot of the quack people thought that throwing in a very specific number would help their sales. This is the first grade edition, which was sold at $1.50 a copy, but to anyone filling out the form and sending in 50 cents, we will send you this book now as a special, and it's from the World Dispensary Medical Association in Buffalo, New York. Then we see that in 1752, Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity, and electricity was to become a great vehicle for quack medical people to use in making money. And here we see Benjamin Franklin just about killing himself by picking up lightning from a lightning storm. People have wondered why he lived through that, but he did. Remember that date, 1752, that's sort of the beginning of the use and discovery of electricity. Galvani in 1752 discovered that electricity makes muscles twitch. And he had a lot of experiments where he would apply electricity to the muscles of a frog and get the frog to do all kinds of muscle twitching stuff. And in 1797, Alexander von Humboldt found a dead bird in his garden. He placed a blade of zinc in the beak and a shaft of silver into the rectum. An electric shock caused the bird to flap its wings and attempt to walk. He also tried the experiment on himself with unpleasant consequences. You got to wonder about that. That point, I'd like to emphasize that because a lot of us that get into electrophysiology and messing around with the electrical activity of the body try these experiments on ourselves. It's sort of a wonder that we survive that. Anyway, moving on, looking at a book, Electricity and Medicine, A History of Their Interaction by Rosenbottom, and has a lot of wonderful examples of the early treatment of various diseases with medical devices. This is a static electricity machine being applied to some poor girl for some reason in 1785. And that little jar that you see hanging down measured the amount of electricity that was being applied to her using an electrometer. This was a typical cure for just about everything in those days. Here's an even bigger static electricity generator being applied to a woman that has presumably some medical problem, and a quack doctor who claims that he's able to cure it with that. Galvanic piles were discovered by Galvani, and on the right you see the arrow pointing to a typical galvanic pile. A galvanic pile is a bunch of little metal discs separated by a thing like a blotter and some liquid between them, and when you have a stack of them like that, it ends up making a pretty good voltage battery. And here we see her sticking the top of the battery into her ear or something like that, and her hand into a dish where the circuit is completed, and in the middle is some kind of a circuit interrupter and clock, typical of the devices that were offered at that point. Galvanic piles were also made into belts, and these are galvanopylene belts. And really, they're just a battery and a belt. You put this around the patient, and down at the bottom, you can see all the things that are made with galvanopylene belts. Galvanic chains, bands, band belts. Now, necklaces are particularly fun. Make a necklace out of a galvanic belt. It's for stiff neck, sore throat, diphtheria, loss of voice, nervous cough, spasms, and noises in the head. So you can cure noises in the head by wearing a necklace of one of these things around your neck. Then along came diathermy, when people discovered radio tubes and ways of increasing the voltage, making electronic devices to produce high voltage oscillating current. This is a circuit diagram of a high frequency diathermy machine. On the lower left, you see the power supply, which has two mercury vapor rectifier 866 tubes, and it's feeding thousands of volts up into the circuit that produces the oscillating voltage and applies it to the patient. And this device is running a serious amount of power. It's putting out somewhere between 500 and 1,000 watts of energy into the patient. And it's a wonder that patients survive this kind of, quote, treatment. The nice thing about diathermy machines is that a lot of ham radio operators have discovered that the circuit diagram is just about a perfect amplifier for a ham radio transmitter. And that by just changing the grid of the two output tubes to accept an input frequency in the ham bands and tuning the output coil L1 to resonate in a ham band, you can have a very, very inexpensive, high-powered transmitter. These things were often available in junk stores and on the surplus market for as little as $5 or sometimes less than that. So they ended up having a use after all. The purpose of diathermy was to produce heating of the patient. And it was thought that simply heating areas of the body would help to cure them. And it was a very popular device for a while. And it fell into disuse, perhaps because it killed a few people. It's hard to know. Here's a patient, in quotes, being subjected to diathermy. And Howard Mariotti, member of our club, found this wonderful thing. It is called an electric baker, and it produces a warm outflow of energy, in other words, heat, and designed and invented in 1926. It could also heat various parts of the body, and the manual explains how it can be used to heat parts of your body to deal with arthritis and help healing and do all kinds of useful things like that. Now, that's considered a Quack Medical device, but it turns out that some of these techniques are experiencing an amazing resurgence of popularity, as we'll see. Now, the most typical of all the electrical cure-alls was called an electrical battery or a medical battery. And let's just become familiar with a medical battery. On the right, we see a typical battery, typically 1.5 volts or two of those cells, maybe 3 volts. And it's hooked to a buzzer, vibrator, and a spark coil. So the vibrator at D makes and breaks the circuit going into the primary of this coil, and that excites a voltage that crosses over into the secondary of this coil, and it can be as high a voltage as 20,000 volts. And that voltage is applied to the patient along with statements about how it's going to cure various things that are wrong with the patient. So this is the basic design of most of the Quack Medical devices that you'll find in antique stores and on the market. And there were hundreds, literally hundreds, actually thousands of these things that were made by various companies. And the idea was to buy one and have it at home and treat yourself for whatever the problem was. Here is a guide to electrotherapy instruments by Courier, and there are 500 pages in this guide, and it turns out there are over 1,500 different medical batteries in this device. So there are 1,500 different versions of this thing, and basically they all do the same thing. They put a high voltage electric shock out to a person's skin, and along with the shock comes a claim that it's going to cure whatever the person's problem is. So here's a page, a couple of pages from the book showing all the different designs of these devices. And they even had some that were applied to the head of the person and would cure various headaches and other problems. So there's a medical battery for disorders of the brain and the head. Pretty scary stuff. That's a lot of voltage to be putting into your head. Here's typical a result of treatment with a medical battery. The patient doesn't like it a lot, but figures they're getting cured. And medical batteries are so common that for the most part, they are basically worthless. You should be able to buy one for between $5 and $15. The exception is the extremely, extremely early ones, like this Smith's torpedo electric machine that I found at an antique show. The machine was patented, made in 1848, and at that time it cost $5.50. And in 1999 at the show, it sold for $7,750. So if you can find a machine that's that old, it can really be worth a lot of money. And you can see it has a very, very rudimentary DC motor, which spins around and impresses heck out of the patient while the patient is getting electric shocks from this device. And it's not in great condition, but you don't find these things very often. The more typically, you find them in better condition, but not as old. This is the cover of the box of the Smith's torpedo magnetic machine, presumably perhaps showing the factory where it was made. Here's a Neff medical battery. Might be worth a little more than $5 or $10, but I don't think it'd be worth more than a couple of hundred maximum, even though it's dated 1850. And again, you see a very basic kind of circuit with heavy windings around the coils of the interrupter and a big long step-up transformer to produce the high voltage. Electromagnetic machine made by Neff. This is an interesting one. It's a portable medical battery made by Gaffey, and it is small, and you put a little bit of solution on the two squares on the left, and they are a galvanic battery, and they produce a little voltage, and that causes the vibrator and the coil on the right side to produce a high voltage, and then the patient is told to hold those electrodes in his or her hands, and or hold one of the electrode in your hand and use one of the devices down at the bottom applied to various parts of the skin. Now, this is a portable device that a doctor, quote, doctor, could bring along to treat patients. This is an interesting one. The machines were typically made as impressively as possible. You wanted to impress your patient with the idea that they were being treated by something really important and technically developed. So this device on the bottom, we see basically an electrical battery, a medical battery that produces high voltage. But if you look closely, while it's producing the high voltage, it produces a spark in the spark gap there, and you can see the cooling coils of the spark gap. So the patient is being treated by this thing while it's going zap, 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 and feeling that the patient's being treated. And the amazing thing about this device is that the top of the device has some violet ray tubes, and violet ray tubes are used to impress patients with how effective the treatment is, because they glow when you apply them to the body. Here's a violet ray, standalone violet ray machine. You can usually buy these at antique shows for perhaps $10 or $15, and they have all kinds of different tubes that can be plugged into the device. And when you turn it on, and of course they come with a manual that claims various ways of curing every disease known to man. When you turn it on, it glows rather dramatically. And if you're holding on to an electrode with one hand, the electrical voltage is so high that it'll jump right from the glass tube over to your hand and produce electric shocks in your hand. So it's a very impressive device to use for, quote, treating various things. Here's a portable one, looks sort of like a flashlight, but it has a buzzer and a step-up coil in it. It's called the Electreat. And it says it relieves pain, and it was patented in 1919, and it was quite widely sold. I've found literally dozens of these things at antique shows. So they sold an awful lot of these things for treating patients. This is one of the more complex of the electrical batteries. This one includes meters to measure things. It says this device was touted to diagnose and cure virtually every known human ailment. Quite tragically, the claims were a fraud concocted by the inventor Francis Cutler Ellis, and this was for sale in an auction site. Here's another one. You come across these things, you don't know what they are initially. You look closely at them, and you still don't know what they are. It says electrogalvanic stimulator. Well, what is that all about? You have to have a little familiarity with Quack Medical Devices to recognize this thing as just another medical battery that's going to produce a high voltage electric shock. But if you read the fine print on the case, it's really scary. Down at the bottom, it says, caution, the patient current exceeds the maximum risk current for this class of equipment. I assume that most people don't read those things, but many people buy these and play around with them, and it is possible to do some serious harm by applying these things to yourself, especially if the device is shorted or it doesn't have a transformer and it's grounded improperly and so on. So they have to be quite careful. Now, you may think that this is old stuff, but just last year, I walked into a CVS pharmacy and I found a Hempvana Rocket TENS therapy device. It takes 2 AA batteries, and it is adjustable with a little adjustment that you see over on the left there. The voltage can be adjusted, and it has a digital readout of the intensity levels. And it is sitting there next to Hempvana moisturizer and Hempvana pain relief cream. And it's just sitting there. And that is simply another example of a medical battery, but in a modern disguise. And you notice that, like many of the medical batteries, this one has 3 different electron shapes, the electrode shapes, a flat electrode, a single round electrode, and 2 round electrodes. You could just plug those into the end of the thing and treat yourself. So pretty scary stuff, but CVS is selling these by the dozens, and people believe that they work, and maybe it's the belief that they work that is the important thing. If you walk through a mall these days, this is the great Maryland Mall, and you find these little displays in the middle of the mall. This one is for, again, a medical battery that applies electric shocks to various parts of the body. And you can see the electrodes on a dummy on the right there, and a couple of the devices. And down on the table, there is a chart showing the proper places to apply these electrodes to the body in order to produce cures of various kinds. There is also electroacupuncture. Acupuncture is a very old technique for treating pain and various illnesses. It has characteristically involved inserting fine needles into a person. Sometimes later on, when electricity was invented, the needles would be hooked up to a voltage source, so they would produce tingling. Nowadays, you can buy something called an electroacupuncture device. Put a couple of AA batteries in this thing, push the little on-off switch, and apply it to the skin. And sure enough, it sends electric shocks, just like every other medical battery, into areas of the skin. And this one comes along with a chart of the foot, and the advice is stimulate the foot, and you'll be able to produce cures of any number of things. For instance, the esophagus, the thyroid gland in the middle, and the spleen over on the right, and kidney, and the liver, and small intestine, and so on. So you could use this chart to find a cure point for just about anything that was wrong with a person. And again, this is being sold as we speak. So is Dr. Benefit's Slim Up Beauty Pulse device. I love the name, Dr. Benefit's Slim Up Beauty Pulse. They're fairly expensive. They're about $35 or $40, and they're selling to this day. It's amazing. A Relaxomat, again, another medical battery in a different form that also makes noises. So while it's zapping you, you hear little tones going beep, 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 and that's a cure. And if you go on Google and you look up electrical stimulation or electrical cures or any number of possible Google searches, you will find any number of possible devices that you can buy anywhere from, on the left, we see CVS Pharmacy at $68. And as you go to the right, gets up to $199, and then up to $2,453 for the one in the middle there. Obviously, somebody is making a lot of money. And the question is, are these things really doing anything beneficial for people? In any event, they are the current day version of the early Quack devices. Here's one: rapid depression, anxiety, and insomnia therapy. 2 AA batteries in this thing, and off it goes. And the tip off for me, usually look for an odd number like this: 1,400 doctors. Doesn't say what, it just says 1,400 doctors. And then you look for the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, and the word cleared has absolutely no meaning. All it says is that the FDA has decided that this probably will not damage the patient. Otherwise, it has no other meaning, an FDA clearance. There are, of course, positive outputs and conclusions, outcomes of all of this. The cardiac pacemaker of 1958 was indeed the effect of stimulating the heart directly with high voltage electric currents to make the heart beat, cause the muscles to contract, just the way Galvani did way back in the 1700s. And it has been immensely helpful to large numbers of people. So the Quack devices, you can say, led up to a medical miracle such as a cardiac pacemaker. Let's look a little bit at electromagnetic field therapy, the idea that putting a person in an electromagnetic field as opposed to applying electrodes to the skin might be therapeutic. And one of the things we know about electromagnetic fields is that many people believe that they can be harmful. In fact, the Federal Communications Commission now requires that all of us ham radio operators measure or calculate the amount of electromagnetic field that is produced by our ham radios, and that might be impinging on us or our family. And there are many people who are scared of buying houses under power lines. The 60-cycle field is thought to be potentially dangerous. And to capitalize on that, Claris sold this device called a Spartus, and they sell it for $475. And just for the heck of it, since they had you can return this for any reason for your full money back, a guarantee. I bought one of these things and I took it home, and I was very careful when I took it apart. But the first thing I did was I put it in a room, and it was supposed to eliminate all noxious 60-cycle magnetic fields in a room. So I put it in a room and I hooked up an oscilloscope, and I took a long piece of wire back to the ground of the oscilloscope from the hot terminal, and I measured the electromagnetic field in the room. And you see the upper oscilloscope drawing there shows the 60-cycle voltage just floating around in a room in a typical house. Then I turned on Claris, and instead of the voltage going down to 0, whoa, look down at the bottom. It tripled in size. So not only did Claris not take away the 60-cycle field in the room, but it multiplied it dramatically. So I had to figure out what was going on. I took it apart. First thing I noticed is that Claris is nothing more, absolutely nothing more than a digital alarm clock, period. Nothing else. And I took it apart. Luckily, there were no anti-tamper screws on it. I unscrewed it and I looked inside, and sure enough, there was a power transformer with no shielding around the power transformer. So it took 110 volts into this transformer, and then it produced the 6 volts. But meanwhile, it radiating this huge electromagnetic field all around the device. So I was very amused by that. And I figured I'd probably be sued if I told people about this, sued by Claris, if nothing else. So I boxed it up and sent it back to them and said, thank you very much, but I don't want to keep it. And I got my money back, luckily. And also a good story to tell, and really quite surprising to see that 60-cycle field dramatically increase when you put this thing on. Now, there were a lot of therapies that involved putting electrical fields around a person, and a lot of various helmets that were used to apply the electromagnetic field. But all of that sort of led up to the use of electroconvulsive shock therapy. Now, prefrontal lobotomies were used with mental patients to calm them down for a very long time in surgery, and they hit a peak of 20,000, approximately 20,000 lobotomies were done in 1951 worldwide. And that data is pretty well authenticated. And there were a lot of people who just plain thought that was inappropriate to lop off the frontal lobe or disconnect the frontal lobe of the brain from the rest of the brain to calm people down, when you didn't really know, even at that point, certainly even now, didn't know exactly what the prefrontal lobe of the brain does. So taking off part of a person's brain to calm them down when you don't even know what that part of the brain does was not well thought of. And when somebody started experimenting by putting a high voltage electric shock across the brain and found that they could get similar results, starting in 1938 and onward, electroconvulsive therapy was used. And the voltage is rather terrifying. Electroconvulsive therapy puts about 100 volts AC onto a patient with almost an amp of current, 800 milliamps, 0.8 amps for anywhere from 1/10 to 6 seconds. And you can just imagine what that's doing to that poor little brain in there. That's a huge amount of current. The patient goes into a tremendous clonic seizure. All of the muscles tense up, and very often the patient bites through their lip or bites their tongue. When they're applying this, they often put a piece of wood in the patient's mouth so that it holds the teeth open and the patient doesn't bite through. But it's an extraordinary procedure, and it's still being used fairly widely for treating all kinds of mental disorders, and it is not harmful as far as we can tell. For the most part, I'll use that possible caveat. For the most part, patients don't show ill effects from this, except that they're a total loss for a while after they've gotten the shock. It takes a while to recover from it, but it's really a very interesting procedure, and interesting to me that this is being done at this point. The amount of voltage, again, is quite high. For me, my research focused on a somewhat similar approach, except I never used human patients. I stuck electrodes into the brains of poor, unsuspecting rodents called rats. And my target for my electrodes was the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus in the brain of a rat does all sorts of amazing things. And if you lower an electrode, you can see here an X-ray of a rat with one of my electrodes lowered down into the hypothalamus. If you lower an electrode into the hypothalamus of a rat, you can see by stimulating, by putting a small nerve impulse size stimulus into those electrodes, what that area of the hypothalamus does. And I found areas of the hypothalamus that produce insatiable eating, that stop eating no matter what, and that produce anger, tremendous anger, where the animal will attack anything nearby, and also fear. These are all areas of the hypothalamus that have been discovered, some of them discovered by me, by stimulating these areas. The reason for all this was to try and map out what the hypothalamus does, and in that way understand how it participates in the electrical activity of the brain. The most dramatic example of stimulating the hypothalamus was done by a professor. There's the hypothalamus located in the very middle center part of the brain, with all kinds of extensions of nerves coming out from it. This is the current issue, 27 October 2023 of Science magazine. Right on the cover of that magazine this week, actually, it's a weekly, is a picture of the hypothalamus and an article, lengthy article about the hypothalamus. So they're still doing this stuff that I was doing back in the 1960s. The most dramatic person working in this field was a man by the name of Jose Delgado, and he implanted electrodes into the brain of a bull, and he hooked those electrodes up to a radio receiver, and he could stimulate those electrodes by sending a radio transmission to the receiver on the head of the bull, which would then send an electrical impulse into the hypothalamus in the area that produces tremendous fear. So here's a picture of Jose Delgado in a bullfighting ring with a bull that has been charging at him at high speed, and he has just zapped the bull in the hypothalamus, in the runaway, in the I'm scared area. And if you look down at the feet of the bull, you can see the dust that's kicked up as the bull comes to a screeching stop and prepares to run away from Delgado. That bull was out to kill Delgado. There was no question. And when Delgado stimulated the hypothalamus, he turned around and ran away. And definitely an unnecessary demonstration, but Delgado had to get research money, and sometimes sometimes you get research money by convincing people in dramatic ways that your research is useful. What has happened as a spin-off of this is quite interesting. There are places in the world where a judge can sentence a violent criminal to have their hypothalamus stimulated constantly in the runaway area, or that can sentence a criminal to have the attack and violence area of the hypothalamus destroyed. You destroy the area by simply putting a higher voltage down through those electrodes into the hypothalamus and essentially electrocuting the brain cells in that area of the hypothalamus. When you do that, it produces a totally docile animal and person. And of course, you get into the question of medical ethics. Is it ethical for a judge to sentence a criminal to have a part of their hypothalamus destroyed so they can never be violent again? I'll leave you with that. The whole field of medical ethics is quite fascinating at this point. Here's the hypothalamus again, a little area in the brainstem area of the brain, and you stimulate it in that way. What has happened is that this has led into other people putting electrodes into the brain of humans, and we now have a field in which humans have had electrodes implanted in their hypothalamus. Here's one. I never did that happily. I stuck with poor defenseless little rats, and it is now given the title of direct brain stimulation. So there are the electrodes in the hypothalamus or other area of the brain, and direct brain stimulation is applied to the brain to produce all kinds of different effects, from supposedly curing Parkinson's to improving other brain function. Very interesting field, really, that has come as a result of the early research on the hypothalamus. And even that traces all the way back to the medical battery, because that was producing little electrical zaps, which is what these electrodes are doing. We go on to external stimulation of the brain. Specifically, I tell you about a Russian sleep machine called the Electroson, invented in Russia. My first contact with this was in 1960, when a man brought it into our laboratory at Columbia and said, I want you to do research on this thing. It puts people to sleep whether they want to be asleep or not. And I want to patent it, and I want to put one next to everybody's bed and have it sold by CVS Pharmacy and so on. And we said, okay. So we got this machine and we started studying it, and we started looking at the electrodes. It has a bunch of controls, one of which determines the pulse width, and the other is the pulse repetition rate. And so you have those different parameters, and you can apply the electricity to the headdress that you see here. And as you can see, there are only two wires coming from the sleep machine. One goes over the eyes, one over the back of the neck. And it produces an electrical pulse that travels through the sleep center of the brain, which is fairly close to the hypothalamus. It's called the reticular formation in the brain. And you can see, if you draw a line between the electrodes over the eyes and the back of the neck, it's going right through the brain's sleep center. And that is this area here, the reticular formation. And when you stimulate it, a person simply goes to sleep, whether they want to or not. Here's a picture of me asleep with the device on. I told you that typically most of the researchers in this field try things out on themselves first. I tried this out on myself first, and then did about 20 or 30 other subjects, paying them to go to sleep in our laboratory. And I found that there was no ill effect whatsoever, that the sleep occurred within 5 minutes of starting the stimulation. And strangely enough, that the sleep that was produced by the stimulation was the equivalent of a whole 8-hour night's sleep, but only with an hour of stimulation. So it was capable of producing compressed sleep. Fascinating stuff. And we helped the people apply to the FDA for clearance for this device, hoping that they would get. The FDA said, no, you can't sell this device. You can't use it. It is illegal in the United States because you cannot produce a timer that will be absolutely certain to turn it off when it needs to be turned off. A patient might put this on themselves, the timer might break, and they might receive this stimulation for 3 days before someone discovered them. And we can't allow that. So it's illegal in the United States, but it is widely used in Russia for sleep therapy and has been since the 1960s. After an operation, people have pain, and this device simply puts them to sleep. It's an amazing device. When it was outlawed, other companies started making it and selling it illegally. Here's an example. Made with a few transistors, very simple circuit, just a pulse voltage into the brain, and it raises interesting questions about whether the government should forbid things like that. Nowadays, I see, thanks to one of the members of the club pointed this out to me, that there is a device that is currently being sold for reducing the amount of time that, I should say, increasing the amount of time that people with brain cancer can live. The idea being to apply electrodes over the head and stimulate these electrodes with a battery pack control unit that you see down there with pulses. And the electrical pulses apparently interfere with the biomagnetic cells in the tumor. Who knew that some cells had biopolarization when this was all started? But it turns out that it does produce changes in the cells within a tumor that are different from the changes in the cells in the brain. And so this device is being widely sold to people with otherwise incurable brain cancer. The problem, you can see the smile on this gal's face on the right. She's going to live an extra 13% longer than if she wasn't wearing this thing. One of the problems with this device is you have to wear it at least 18 hours a day. And they've developed all kinds of hats and things to hide this thing on a person's head. You don't want to walk out in the public with electrodes all over your head. But this is really one of the modern miracles that has evolved from the early work on stimulating the brain and electrical stimulation. It raises some interesting questions about the question of, should people be allowed or encouraged to apply electrical stimulation to their brain? Do-it-yourself head zappers hope to become better gamers and problem solvers, but the technology may or may not be ready for prime time. We don't have enough research to really know about this technology, but it seems as though it's not doing any harm as long as the voltage is not electroconvulsive level. It's a much lower level, and it's not going to produce convulsions of the brain. So if you go on eBay and or Amazon, you can buy any number of different devices to stimulate the brain in this way. Now, happily, there is a new discovery, and that is electromagnetic stimulation of the brain using a magnetic field and not an electrical field. Unlike the other techniques that we talked about earlier, this technique does not require that you do surgery on the brain, and it does not require that you have electrodes all over the brain. And it uses a magnet over the side of a person's head or the top of the head that produces a magnetic field. And several of these magnets beating against each other can produce a targeted electric field. So you take this device, you hold it over the area, the brain that you want to treat and induce a current in, and it does it. The coils produce a focal pattern. Now this This is a drawing that they use to explain the focal pattern. To me, it looks like the pattern is expanding and not focusing, but perhaps in the very middle where that little arrow is, the two parts of the pattern come together and stimulate the area of the brain that is the target area. And here's the device being used with a patient. Several of these coils are placed over the head and aimed very, very carefully at a target area of the brain. And the results are quite promising in terms of the effect on specific areas of the brain. Here's a focused magnetic probe on the surface of the brain, producing stimulation of the area of the brain that's indicated in red there. And so as you become more and more focused, you get closer and closer to the research that I was doing that required implanting electrodes in the brain. And instead, you can now stimulate target areas of the brain magnetically rather than electrically. Very exciting stuff. I'm going to move on quickly to another application of electricity in the body called biofeedback therapy. And biofeedback therapy is something that I've done a lot of work with, and I'm quite convinced that it is not a quack device. It is for real. Biofeedback therapy involves picking up voltages of some kind from a person. That person is over on the left. And taking those voltages, follow the yellow arrows around to the right, and putting them into some kind of a signal processor or amplifier. So you take tiny little brain waves, tiny little muscle twitches, and you amplify those signals, and you then feed them into a person in the form of a display. So the person can see in front of them the display, which is in the middle of this diagram, which gives them feedback on what they are doing electrically. And an example of biofeedback therapy is if a person is feeling very anxious, several changes occur in their body. Their skin resistance becomes lower, and they end up having microscopic tension in their muscles. If you take the skin resistance measurement and display it to them on a display and say, listen, this is your anxiety. Try different kinds of mental thoughts and sets and ideas, and listen to some imaginary music and see if you can do anything to make the anxiety as you see it on the display go down. And the same thing with muscle tension. And within 5 or 10 minutes, most patients are able to produce meaningful changes. So let's look at how that evolved. Here is a patient, my wife, hooked up to one of my biofeedback devices. And you'll recognize this as an old Tektronix oscilloscope. Wasn't old in those days. It was a nice modern Tektronix oscilloscope. But the idea is she has electrodes on the muscles of her hand, which reflect the degree of anxiety that she is feeling. And the scope is showing a display of how much electrical signals are being given off by those muscles. And her instructions are, make those signals get smaller by thinking of different ways of relaxing, pleasant thoughts, and so on. That's biofeedback in action. And believe it or not, my wife is still married to me after 63 years of this kind of thing. Anyway, we started out with measuring what's going on in the body fairly early on with the concept of a lie detector. A lie detector detects what's happening to a person electrically and with respect to their breathing and heart rate and blood pressure. And here we see an FBI lie detector in use and another FBI lie detector. A lie detector has several measurements of the activity of the nervous system as it is exhibited through electrical activity. And you look at those measurements while you ask people embarrassing questions and see how they respond with increases or decreases in the voltage and respiration rate and heart rate. There are various devices for doing this. This is a student research lie detector, which measures the amount of change or the change in a person's skin resistance, which is a very good measure of the anxiety level of a person. The theory being, if you tell a lie, you're going to be a little more anxious than if you're telling the truth. And another student research psychogalvanometer, fancy name for a lie detector. And this one's much cheaper than the other one. And then we find that the toy companies got into the act. And this is a Marlin toy lie detector from 1950, if you can imagine going back that far. And the idea is you get a person to hold on to the electrodes, or you put the electrodes on the finger of a person, and you look at the needle, and the needle shows whether the person is lying. If the needle's over on the left, you can see a little angel symbol. And if the needle's over on the right, you can see a little devil symbol. And you ask a person embarrassing questions. And if they're not embarrassing, the needle goes on the left. And if they're really upsetting and embarrassing, it goes over to the right. So Marlin Toy Company sold these things. Really neat little circuit, has one tube and a battery and a flashlight battery for the filament of the tube. And these were sold at Schwartz Toy Store in New York City for a lot of money. I think they were maybe $18 or something like that at that time, 1950. And they, of course, gave rise to other toy lie detectors. This one is called the Super Sleuth. And again, it just does the same thing. It measures the amount of skin resistance produced in the person. And skin resistance is proportional to the amount of tension that a person is feeling or anxiety. And Science Fair and Radio Shack put out a lie detector kit. And it would make a tone so cheap, it didn't even have a meter, it just had a tone. And the tone would go, woo, if you were calm, and then it would go, wee, 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 if you were telling a lie. And the amazing thing about this device is it was really, really accurate. And you could ask a person an embarrassing question, and the thing would go, woo, 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 woo. And I think that the company got sued for this because it was so accurate. You could ask a person very embarrassing questions and get very valid answers out in terms of the tone of the output. So they say, easy to liven up any party, fun for all age groups. But if you ask a person a really embarrassing question, it might be very, very embarrassing for the person. So they changed the name of this thing. Here's another one in kit form, but they eventually changed the name from lie detector to a biofeedback monitor kit, and talked about how your emotions can be changed. Hear your emotional life and learn to relax and reduce stress. So you use this device to listen to that tone, and you try all kinds of mental and physical relaxation till the tone goes from woo, 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 lower, and that means you're relaxed. And that's, again, a form of biofeedback. Biofeedback is really a very effective technique. Here's a biofeedback measuring device that measures a person's heart rate and shows it to the person. You can try all kinds of mental activities, relaxation of your body, different postures, and see what will make the heart rate, as indicated on that meter, go down. And here is an electromyograph, a device that is used to measure the literally microvolt signals that are given off by a person's muscles when the muscles tense up. And by looking at the meter on this electromyograph, you can learn to relax your muscles and then relax them more and more, and really learn what kind of posture and thought processes, maybe music, are most relaxing for you. And that's what biofeedback is all about. And it turns out to be really quite an effective technology. I even used it on my son. He's having a good time there. So anyway, I thought you would enjoy this little trip through Quack Medical Devices. how they led the way to today's medical miracles. And if you want to come to my Quack Medical Museum, I have a bunch of the devices you saw and some others on the internet. It's w1tp.com/IamQuack.htm. I think the name is quite appropriate. IamQuack.htm. So thank you for your patience, and I hope you have enjoyed this little trip through the field of electrical stimulation and electrical recordings of the nervous system. Okay, so there we are.
Excellent, 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 Tom. Everybody is welcome to unmute as well.
Happy to answer any questions, and I hope it was a fun trip.
I'm seeing commercials on TV in the here and now about these like LED masks and things that people are supposed to be putting on various parts of their head or body or whatever, that are supposed to do who knows what, anything from stopping pain to growing hair.
Various kinds. No, there are LED heat headsets in which the LEDs just produce infrared light and warm your head. And there are others that produce ultraviolet, and God knows what that's doing to your head. And it's buyer beware, caveat emptor on this stuff. Even now, hundreds of years after the first of these Quack medical devices were put out there, and boy, go on eBay or on Amazon and just type in stimulation or self-stimulant biofeedback, any of these things, you'll be amazed at this stuff that's out there.
Yeah, one comment about that. The other people around there are the Scientology people who have this thing which they called an E-meter, which as far as I can see was 2 tin cans and an O-meter. But that was supposed to diagnose everything about your brain and would cure all your problems. I'm sure it was not $5 either.
Right, Dick, that's exactly, I meant to mention that is exactly what those lie detector, the cheapy lie detectors and the biofeedback devices did. They measured the skin resistance, period. And the skin resistance is indeed proportional to the amount of stress that you are feeling in your body. So the E-meter, L. Ron Hubbard and all of his crowd in Scientology claim that they could use the E-meter to help you achieve a state of what they called clear, which was, they said, a very relaxed and peaceful state, sort of like what people claim they can achieve through meditation and stuff. The problem was that in order to get an E-meter, you had to pay Scientology an immense amount of money, a couple of $1,000s to get an E-meter for yourself, or you could sign up for a Scientology weekend where trained E-meter operators would help you achieve clear. And a Scientology weekend would cost anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 to $10,000. And would guarantee to make you happy and relaxed and comfortable and so on. A good point. That went on for a long time. And I remember walking the streets of San Francisco. There were Scientology peoples with little card tables and an E-meter on the table and 2 chairs. And they'd say, come and sit down. I'll show you something here. And they would hook you up to the E-meter, and they would show you that when you were upset, they say, what's the most upsetting thing you can think of? And the E-meter would go, whoop, whoop. And then they would say, yeah, we're able to really relax you and take you into a state of clear and happiness and so on for the rest of your life. And here's what it'll look like, and here's what it feels like. Just think of relaxing, the E-meter going down. Very, very convincing, sort of like the old quack standing on the side of the truck there selling salve.
Yeah, I guess one of the things, if you said, I just paid $3,000 for this weekend, that's pretty upsetting.
Right.
I looked up e-meters, and you can get the base model for $625, or you can get the deluxe model for $3,850. And
And
that's
you can buy a Radio Shack little, like the science fair thing you saw there on eBay for $12. And they do exactly the same thing, exactly. L. Ron Hubbard, that's how he built that empire of his and that huge building and all that. And he was a good salesman. He was a good quacker.
I know people who are using TENS for treatment of muscle spasms and various ailments. It's become pretty popular recently. How does that differ from the early versions of electrical stimulation?
Well, the technology is the same. It's just that people are realizing that if you apply it, for instance, many people have bad backs. And if you take these things and you put them over a person's back and you start zapping different places there, sometimes it's going to do some good. The person will either believe it does some good or it'll really do some good and counteract the pain, the impulses. So it's pretty impressive. They're being very widely sold. I haven't actually tried one because I don't have any pain that would respond that dramatically to it. But it is a very popular therapy, and there are other things, NEMS. If you don't like TENS, you can go to NENS therapy and so on. So you can look it up on Google and get some feedback. And I tend to like to look at Wikipedia statements about things. If you look up TENS on Wiki, you might get some reasonable information about it, but it derives directly from the early medical batteries. And I wouldn't put it down as a quack technique because it has helped a lot of people. Maybe what I'm saying is that early quack, there's early quack and late quack. And the early quack, everything was unknown. In the late quack, we know some of these things work. And you have to decide which one is going to work and which one isn't. One of the ways to do that is to try it.
Yeah, I think some of the more invasive TENS units, that actually go into the body and to actually try to get them to hit nerves near the spinal cord to override pain messages getting to the brain to try to, alleviate bad pain.
Yeah. And you can think of the nervous system as basically a big wiring diagram, and the spinal cord is just taking all this information up to the brain. And if you can interrupt or interfere with some of the information going up in the pain pathway, a person's going to be happy about that. I remember I went to a quack, no, I forget the name, but anyway, he was a back pain guy, and he said, I'm gonna do something that's gonna make your back pain go away. And he had one of these devices that was sort of unnamed, and he put it on my back. And from that point on, I couldn't feel any temperature of anything on my back. He destroyed all of the temperature sensing cells in that area of my back, and didn't help a whole lot with back pain, but it was intriguing to see that he'd managed to do this electrically in a very short length of time. And he was very happy about it. He said, "See, you can't feel anything now." And he put a warm thing on there and I wouldn't feel it.
I was just wondering though, Tom, these things being sold at CVS, you just wonder if some of the lawyers at CVS aren't thinking, can this in any way, shape, or form do something to someone that they'll complain? And that looks to me like a lawsuit coming down the road.
I know, I thought of that. I bought one of those, of course, the minute I saw it, and I took it apart and I figured, yep, that's another medical battery. It just has electronic readouts on it. And they have all kinds of disclaimers in there, don't use on raw bleeding skin and stuff like that, and use at your own risk and so on. But I don't think, Dick, that it could had the power to do anything really bad to a person. I think that it was and is pretty much just a little zapper, and that the only kind of person that I think it might be really bad for was a person that has heart arrhythmias anyway,
Ah,
AFib, atrial fibrillation or something like that. And if you zap a person like that, it's liable to interfere with the already messed up rhythm of the heart and do some damage. But maybe they figure anybody who dies isn't going to sue them.
okay.
Here's a little gadget I have.
Ah, there it is. Yes, Lou. Perfect. A medical battery. Nice going.
Yeah, I haven't powered it up, but I think there was two little. It's missing some parts. There was a little metal, probably cylinder on the end of here on both of these, and you held on to them, and that's that's what you got. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Is there a name on it or a date or a patent?
There is a name. I'd have to let me just see if I can look at this with my magnifying glass. No, it's just a plate that shows you the level of from 10 to 100 as far as you pull out that sleeve on the coil,
Yeah.
and that would give you the different voltages, that you would come up with out of this little coil. But I don't see a name on it. Nice little
Yeah,
wooden box. Yeah.
that varies the electromagnetic coupling between
Yeah.
the primary and
Yeah.
secondary, and varies the intensity of the signal, right? Oh,
Yeah.
that's great. Where'd you find it?
I have no idea. Like most of the stuff I have, I came across it somewhere at some point in time, but who knows?
Be fun to know exactly how many of those were made. It's 1,500 different models in one book. There are a lot of them
Wow.
there.
I also have a ultraviolet, a violet ray
Yeah.
machine. I put it on the group there, the IO group, a picture of it with a little video of it working, and it was found in the back of an old barber shop where it was had been closed for many years, and this was up on a shelf, and a friend found it, and he gave it to me, and it had the little rake with it that you could go through and maybe grow some hair. But I tried it, and I don't think it works.
Oh, okay. I used to use those in my classes when I'd talk about the early ways of treating mental illness. Turn that thing on and go. The other things I didn't mention, of course, there are lots of other medical devices out there. One of them is called a FLEAM, FLEAM, which is a little spring-loaded device that cuts a hole in you. You hold it on a patient and you push the spring and it makes a hole in the patient, and then the patient's supposed to hold their hand up and let the evil spirits drain out.
Oh,
That's a beauty.
That's
I
great.
love
Yeah.
that one. And then, of course,
Yeah.
leeches have been used therapeutically for years. You could go into a pharmacy in the old days and buy a couple of leeches and put them on your skin, and it would suck all the evil spirits out of you. And recently, they've discovered that leeches actually inject an anticoagulant into your blood to make the blood flow better. And that led to the discovery of anticoagulants and the use of anticoagulants that is helping keep many of us with heart arrhythmias alive at this point. So some of these things have had very good outcomes.
I remember seeing in an old magazine ads for tapeworms for weight loss.
Right.
Eat yourself a nice tapeworm and then just go to town on whatever you wanted because you weren't going to get those calories because the tapeworm was going to get it for you.
Yeah.
To continue what Lou was saying about the device he had, at a recent Harps Club 2 weeks ago, I had a stimulus of my scalp also. Since I am follically challenged, I don't know if you can see that. And I had that device running along my head and had the rake, the glass rake, with the ultraviolet tube coming back and forth. And I can attest to it that it did not grow any more hair. It didn't cause me to lose any more hair, but I didn't grow any more hair.
It definitely
That's
gets your
amazing,
attention.
Richard. Wow, I didn't know they were still using those devices like that.
This is from Dr. Lou Lombardi. He give it to him to restore one and have it working as a demonstration. Yes.
Wow.
Say, Robert, did you have something you wanted to add? Sorry, Robert Loescher, I saw your hand.
Oh no, I'm just, it's Bob, K1DFT.
Well, years ago, I came across I believe it's Davis and Kidder electrotherapeutic. It's a little dynamo that you crank. And I was excited to see that it says patented in 1854. And so I said, wow, I've got really something maybe before the Civil War that's had something to do with electrical devices. And then later on, I found out that the exact same Kidder machine was still being sold in 1900. Exact same thing. So as it turns out, probably the one that I had was a mere 120 years old. But
And they look good too, Robert. They look very good because they have all those things spinning around. And the idea with those is that it doesn't have a separate battery. You just crank it and it's a dynamo. It's making its own electricity. They're really quite popular, or they were back then. And again, if you happen to be lucky enough to get the instruction book, you'll see it cures everything you could ever imagine having wrong with you.
Wonder, was this somehow tied into the early development of automobiles? I mean, I can't help but think this is just like it's a coil and it's a set of points, and everybody's been zapped at least once by the spark plug on the other end when you're, you got your secondary circuit and you got your primary circuit and you got a car battery and you're opening and closing something. I mean, it's all you need is a cam to have it go, at the right time with a piston, and you're building yourself an engine.
Well, as you know, the old Model T Ford had 4 spark coils on it, one for each spark plug.
Right.
And those spark coils are perfect. They're 4 different medical batteries right there. You can cure all sorts of things by putting your hands across the spark plugs.
Yeah.
Well, actually, hey, Ken, how about if I quickly share the device you had at Fall Brookline? For there are probably people here who didn't see it when we had the last meeting.
By all means.
Yeah, so it's just to and maybe you can say a few words about the device. I think this is about where we are. All right, hopefully you can see that. So Ken, when we so you came across this. How did you come across this?
There it is.
Yeah.
I can't tell you too much about it, John. It was my son's. I don't know where he got it. He runs a computer service store, and people bring in things for recycling or electronics to donate. Somebody brought in this fantastic outfit. It looks like it was made in the 1930s, I think around 1938 or 9, according to the documentation. And it's a complete kit. It has all kinds of attachments, full instruction sheets. Everything was original, and it looks unused. Had spare vacuum tubes.
The electrosurgical set.
Yeah. And it's made to stick into every orifice of your body.
That'd be,
How exciting.
there you go. Here are all the call
There it is.
instructions, all the probes you can play with.
Great.
You know, here you go. Gynecology, double needle surgical set. Double
Look
needle.
at all the potential lawsuits.
Oh, gosh, yes. The universal single needle surgical set. This is very impressive. Terminal adapters, foot switch, cervical coning knife. Ay, ay, ay. Pretty scary stuff.
Sure is.
This-
And it all comes in a nice case. And he's got it for sale if anybody's interested.
Obviously, these are all pre FDA, right?
Obviously.
Amaze your friend, be the life of the party.
And you get a free bottle of cocaine tonic with it.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that's amazing stuff. But it was appropriate because not everybody might have seen this from the last meeting, so may as well share. And of course, the topic is actually perfect here. Stop sharing here, but that was actually perfect. But yes, as Ken said, it is for sale. So in case you want to do a little bit of self-stimulation, self-surgery, you know, here's your opportunity.
Self-abuse.
Self-abuse.
Well, it does appear though that, I mean, that foot switch appears to maybe be like a fail-safe kind of, you know, safety device. If you're using something and you have to turn it on with your foot, if you go into some convulsion and fall to the floor, your foot's going to come off the switch and then it's going to shut off, and hopefully, you know, that'll save you. But
or it could be a step-up voltage switch.
yeah.
Yeah, but
Ah,
this is really quite outstanding, Tom. This is enormously a lot of fun and interesting. And of course, I imagine you'll be posting on your own site for other people to enjoy. But only
I'm surprised you don't have a little clip to share from like Young Frankenstein or something, you know, with the.
well, yeah, you know, it's funny. I was just having to watch that movie only a couple of nights ago. And that's funny also, when Tom was giving his presentation, I suddenly had these visions of Uncle Fester with the light bulb in his mouth.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah, Uncle Fester.
You know, so but that was really terrific, Tom. We really greatly appreciate that. You know, it's certainly not your mainstream topic for vintage electronics. It's certainly enjoyable for those of us. And I've actually recall seeing the box for the Radio Shack lie detector, and I'd long forgotten about it. So when you showed it, I was like, oh,
Yep.
right. You know, I was just glad that my family didn't have that. You know, little kids, you always have extra tooth, right? You know.
Yeah, if you see one of those lying around somewhere, pick it up and just play with it. It is fascinating. I love it. You can sit there with that thing on and it's going woo, and it's, as your mind goes different places, the thing goes different places. It goes woo, woo. You're literally tuning in to your own nervous system, and it's a wonderful thing. I think that's something that's overlooked in terms of maybe if they made it a little more musical, sort of like the old theremins.
Yeah, theremin. Yep. I was thinking more in terms of, I bet you there's probably 9 out of 10 politicians have one of those in their closet that helps them lie with a straight face. And you know.
What have you got, Lou? I see you showing something.
There, Lou.
I was trying to show you a picture on my phone of my little violet ray set.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I have a fluorescent bulb next to it, which is lit up, being excited by that unit. It's called a Super Marvel. 1924, I think, is the date on it.
That's pretty cool.
It's in like new condition. It's really, really neat.
Wow, you got some fun stuff there, Lou. That's cool.
Yeah.
Not a lot of fun to use one of those because you get some pretty hefty zaps out of that.
Oh, it can give you some pain. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to, as I said, demonstrate it in classes as a therapeutic device, and I learned very quickly not to demonstrate it on my own skin. I'll bring one. I have one out in the barn. I'll bring it here and we'll fire it up for fun next time.
I enjoyed the photos of you and your family there, Tom. Fast asleep with the electrozone.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. So were you asleep at the point that photo was taken?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you can't help it with that thing. You're out. But it's a very strange kind of sleep. And the problem is, although it compresses 8 hours of sleep needed down to 2 hours, the problem is that after 2 or 3 days of that, only getting 2 hours of compressed sleep a day for maybe 3 days, you start hallucinating and having the same symptoms that you would get with REM deprivation, rapid eye movement sleep. So what that tells me is that you're not able to dream while the machine is on, and you need those dreams. If you deprive an animal of REM sleep, they go crazy too.
So I can see airlines using this one for those overnight flights. So the red eye specials, just
Yeah.
sit down and turn on.
That was my dream. I really wanted them to be able to bring it into the country and use it, and the FDA outlawed it. And then I thought maybe some of the foreign airlines might use it, even the Russian ones, because it's a Russian machine. And as far as I can tell, nobody has done it, but it really does seem like a great way to deal with jet lag.
So instead of an oxygen mask dropping down, you'd have one of those devices come out.
Take your choice. Oxygen or sleep.
Yeah. Either way, you're faced with it.
It might eliminate jet lag.
Well,
Yeah.
Has anyone flown Aeroflot?
And live to talk about it?
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's another the safety record notwithstanding. But well, this is great. I don't know if anyone have any other anything to add to this. I think what I'll do is I'm in no rush to end the meeting, but I'll probably end here, not actually pick up at Fall Brookline. I would just wait till the next meeting, but I think this is just a nice way to bookend the meeting. And I certainly enormously appreciate Tom doing this. Every presentation he gives is enormously entertaining and interesting, and this is certainly
very good. Yeah.
We really appreciate that. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Thank you all
thanks,
for
Tom.
putting up with me. It's obviously a lot of fun for me to do these things. I spent 35 years trying to keep students awake with a little bit of humor.
I think your reward will be to get a diathermy machine sent to your farm.
Perfect.
That's right, baby. Maybe your wife may not be so smiling this time around as she was in the photo. But
she knows now when to go in another room or another county.
Stay away from the diathermy device. But well, thanks very much. I guess what I'll do is I will wrap up this meeting unless anyone has anything else to add. But I want to certainly thank everybody for joining, and certainly thank you to our guests as well for attending. It's always enjoyable to have a few guests from outside know what we're all up to here. And but at any rate, if not, I will. Just final reminder: the next meeting will be 3 weeks away because I just shifted things around. So we'll do that on November 22nd, just before Thanksgiving. And otherwise, thank you very much, Tom, everybody, and enjoy your next 3 weeks. Stay warm. I hate to say that. And we'll see you around, or I'll talk to you over the reflector. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, John.
Very good.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you running it, and a lot of fun.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right. Good night.
Night.
Night, everybody.
Thank you, Tom.